Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demon Land podcast. My name is Andy, and for the second year in a row, the Demons are the last undefeated team standing, a feat that this club has not achieved since the 1955 and 56 seasons. You all know what happened in those years. Back to back, baby. But we're only taking it 1 week at a time. Joining me tonight, long-time Demon Lander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, Binman. Good evening to everyone else listening out there in Demon Land. Well, we're 4-0. We've dispatched 3 of last year's finalists and now facing a 4th one this week. So we're all here to find out how we did it and what are our prospects for the coming week.
They were finalists. I thought they were bottom 4 teams by the look of this year's ladder. Also joining us tonight, B-Man. Good evening, B-Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demon Landers. I'm very pleased I bought shares in Freo. They're looking good, and I'm pleased I was selling my stock in Hawks because they're dropping a little bit after a touch-up from the Saints. So, yeah, all's looking well in the football prediction stakes. Well,
George, your Bombers are back up. My Blues are down. Topsy-turvy.
I've sold my Bomber shares as well.
I'll hold on my Carlton ones. I won't sell just yet. Well, let's talk about our game. I must concede that I went into this match a little bit gun-shy, and sure, I had seen Port's past performances this season, and I was aware of their injuries to some key players, but I still believe that there was no way a team that was touted as a premiership contender and a top 4 certainty by some could slip to 0-4 so easily, but boy, was I wrong. They were so much worse than I could have even hoped for before we get into the game. Initially, I was extremely disappointed that we didn't bury them. We certainly had some opportunities going forward, and but for some handball chains that fell down and the forward 50 connections weren't quite clicking, then that partly accounted for our lower scoreline. And then you add to that the 3 junk time goals for the Power once we, let's face it, we'd put the cue in the rack, and the final margin certainly flattered them and didn't reflect the pummeling that we had dished out, which included inflicting on Port their first ever goalless first half of football since the entry into the AFL in 1997, and that's 570-odd matches. And isn't it fantastic to be on the good side of an embarrassing record for once? We mentioned last week that there really isn't many more embarrassing records that we're associated with. There are a couple, but we'll get to that at some point. But and there is that new thread on Demon Land chronicling the records to be proud of that we are quietly or not so quietly adding to, and that goalless half a footy that we were a part of is certainly a record for us to be proud of. Those records that we're proud of include last week with making the Bombers 0-3 for the first time in 57 years, and it's really nice to be the ones inflicting the pain for once. But you know what? I quickly recovered from that early disappointment of not beating up a cellar dweller, because I remembered, Binman, your wise words. You were always quick to point out that you don't need to spend all your petrol tickets early in the season. You want to strangle your opposition and starve them of scoring opportunities, which our miserly defence, strengthened by the inclusion of Jake Lever, did. And you want to keep something in the tank for the rest of the season, which we did too. And I think it's really important to remember that we're coming off 2 6-day breaks, 2 interstate games in 3 weeks, and one of those was that energy-sapping game in the heat and humidity of the Gold Coast a few weeks ago. And if you look at our average winning margin last season, with the exception of the Gold Coast match, the average winning margin was 24.5 points. Adding the Gold Coast game of that 98-point win, it's 29 points. And then our finals average winning margin was 63 points. So we're sort of tracking of what we were last year. I saw a lot of people online, whether it was on Demonland or social media, who had that similar reaction to my initial concern about our win. But what people need to realise is that, we're pretty much in cruise control at the moment. It doesn't seem like we've got out of first gear, maybe second, a bit of third here and there, but we're getting the job done. And sure, there's room for improvement, and sure, perhaps our opposition hasn't lived up to the hype, as we mentioned earlier, Bulldogs, Essendon and now Port. But as they say, you can only beat who you play. And as a result of where we finished last season, we've been given a harder draw, and if by circumstances it turns out that it becomes an easier draw because teams have dropped off, then that really isn't our problem. And in respect to that, it might be the case that it might be the case that what we thought would have been an easy opponent might turn out to be a more challenging one later down the track. In any event, we can only focus on what we can control, and we'll play and aim to beat anyone, anytime, anywhere. And before I move on to you guys, I have a clip from David King on Gerard Wheatley's program. Each Monday, the two of them do an hour-long segment called, I think it's the Monday Means Test. And here's what David King had to say about the D's only going at about 70% at the moment, so that the rest of the competition better look out.
Be very afraid, Gerard. Melbourne are going at about 70% of last year, and they're already proving they're 50% better than the rest of the competition. They're 4-0, and they're going half rat power. And people say, oh, that's ridiculous. But if you don't look at the winning and the losing and you just look at the numbers, which is what we do, we try to look at the trends of the game. So last year they were not just the best team in the comp without the footy, they were best by some margin, back to number 2. They were the 4th best with the footy, and they're the two things that I mainly track. And we always know their contest stuff is unbelievable because of the talent that they've got and the way, the brutality in which they play with Oliver and Petrarca and Lever being able to win the ball back, and those guys in the forward half, they just win contests. We talk about the two rucks a lot, but all over the ground they just win contests. If you look at them this year, so the rankings I'll just give you last year's rankings just to give you an idea, okay? So the core 4 that Horny and I track, they were 7 with the footy, 1, 5 and 1 without a footy clearance, post clearance. So 7, 1, 5, 1. But the 2 1s were by a huge margin. This year right now they're going 12, 4, 12, 1. So they're nowhere near. Everyone's talking about the finished product of the other teams, the chasing pack. The Demons are nowhere near, and a lot of it's to do with talent that's out at the moment. So they're having to move different players to different areas. Brayshaw's having to go back. He's their wingman, right? And they're getting full-toed odds out of marquee players at marquee moments. So they're putting away teams not on talent. It's a bit harsh to say that. Their defensive stuff is still incredibly strong, but it's not at the levels of last year. It really isn't. So I'll look at them and I say, okay, their defensive 50 is still the best in the comp, and their ability to win the ball back is still the best in the comp. Intercepts through that mid-zone between the arcs. Outside of that, they are a very average football team by their standards and by the competition standards. So the scope for improvement at Melbourne is still greater than the scope for improvement at other clubs in this season. In this season, given the talent you've got and the system you've got, the system you've started with. Now, we know that things change after 6 to 8 weeks for every team. They all, tinker with the way they're playing, have their finger on the pulse with the trends of the competition, and they make alterations. But right now, they're going at 70%, and they're clearly better than any other team in the competition. Yeah. So be very afraid, Gerard.
They felt coming into the season, they felt to me like a 19-3 or a 22 team. And the question is, can anybody lift their level to catch them? It's a preliminary final question. They're Richmond 2018 at the moment. They're going to run the comp, and we'll see you in the prelims.
Yeah.
See what it looks like then.
Well, a lot can go wrong.
Yeah.
So we're talking about, we're not crystal balling, we're not locking them in for anything. We're just saying in terms of the way they play and what we've seen only 6 months ago, there's massive scope. It was a great luxury to have, isn't it? So you're 4-0, game clear, top of the table, and you've got so much to work on. And they don't care what the rest of the competition are doing. They'll be in there worrying about themselves today. Hey, we've done this better, we've done that better. You need to do this, you need to do that. And they're the harshest judgments on their own standards. But what a luxury to have. I just think that I think that this this two ruck system, the dual rucks are getting all the conversation, and it's probably masking a few of the actual issues at the Ds. And it sounds stupid to say that sort of stuff, but that's how excited you should be if you're a Ds fan.
I can't work out whether he's having a go at us or selling how great we are. I would have liked to have heard what he thought some of our issues were.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I think he's right in terms of I'm not sure about going at Rat Power, and I'm not sure of him framing things like the issues because, I think that what's interesting is that we're clearly prepared to – experiment's not quite the right word, but they've been uber focused this year on their ability to stop opposition scoring. And if you listen to Goody, as George said last week, Goody's getting more and more revealing in his presses all the time. And so it really behoves people to listen to what he's saying because he's drilling down on that defensive stuff at the moment. I think we are travelling, but I mean, it's really for context. We've beaten the team that we played off in the premiership last year. We've beaten the team they beat in a prelim, and Essendon, of course, made the finals last year. Now, all three clubs are struggling to one degree or another. But on paper, if you look at that beginning of the season, and strip away where you think Melbourne are in relation to them, that's a pretty tough draw. It opens up from here on, for the next 5 or 6 rounds. We've got a nice draw. So, we could realistically almost go to the bye in the same situation, sort of 10-1, 9-2 sort of thing as we did last year. And it's interesting he's used to the stats because, I mean, he frustrates me because his analysis is often just the numbers that he's given. But, he talks about our defence is nowhere near it was last year, and it's a complete nonsense. Watson 11's been posting and updating on the tactics and game strategy thread on Demonland, the percentage of goals conceded from inside 50s, which he makes the excellent point that it's a really, really good measure of success over the last 10 years that it's been, basically the teams up the top have finished 1 to 4. At the moment, we're top of that, 36% scores conceded inside 50. Only 18% when teams go inside 50, do they score a goal. I mean, it's remarkable. So we're number one, despite having, half of our best 6, best 7 defenders out. We're still the best defensive side. So I'm not quite sure his point about that. I agree with his general thing that we're not going at full power yet. We don't need to. And, it's a long season. It's about getting up on an upward scale. Interestingly, on that measure, and one of the reasons I'm sort of bullish on Freo from the beginning, from last season, is their defensive system's really strong. So they're second. They're equal top with us, 36% also, percentage scores conceded inside 50. Down the bottom of that ladder is Essendon, and they can't sort out their defensive structure at all. But so, whilst I agree with some of his points there, I think he's well off in terms of sort of implying we're not, well, particularly around, we're not yet at our full strength defensively. We haven't got our full strength team in, but that's about what we were last year. I think we finished the season, maybe it was even 36% last year.
George, anything to add for that?
No, I think there was a fair summation, and you've got to take David King with a grain of salt at the best of times. But his main point is very valid, and I think it was shown up particularly in this game against Port. We were always in control, and the fact that we only kicked 10 goals of the game and still won by 5. And even that was after we conceded 3 junk time goals effectively. That's just incredible and shows the state of our defensive systems at the moment. This is a preliminary finalist from last year, and they've managed to get 2 goals effectively in 9/10 of the game. It's just an incredible effort. And especially when you consider that if you said Petrarca and Oliver would have had mid-20s possessions for the game, and we'd kick 10 goals in total, you'd think that there'd be something wrong with the conditions. But that I don't think that was the case. But it's what really struck me again in this game was how poorly Port were coached. They just kept trying to switch the ball, and they were going nowhere. If they'd done their homework on the Melbourne side, they would have and should have known that you just cannot get the ball across the ground and switch like you used to do 2, 3, 4 years ago. And they kept on trying it and kept on running into Langdon, kept on running into Brayshaw, kept on running into A and B down the other side, who were there before their players got the ball. And you could just hear the frustration of the Port supporters, knowing that their players and team and coach and side were just going nowhere in this game. It's not surprising how few goals they kicked for the game. They just had no system to operate with, and our defensive systems were absolutely first class.
But and I'll touch on this in our sort of positives. But that was conscious. What they did was conscious. They made that decision, and as I said, I'll sort of talk about it at greater detail later. But they, I'm not sure if you saw the presser, George, but they came in the into that game with the clear tactical decision to do exactly that, to play keepings off. And so, as I said, I'll talk about it a bit later about the decision to do so. I agree that was poor coaching, but what you're talking about, that switching, was deliberate. And what was brilliant about Melbourne, and it just shows where we're at, we were just happy for them to do that. We just let them do that. They came in with a plan. In the presser afterwards, Hinkley was saying he was really happy. That was what they wanted. They wanted the score to be, they were happy with 0-0. Essentially, and Melbourne's ability to put on, surge and kick goals in a short space of time, we just threw a spanner in that thingo. And so, I'll talk a bit about later about that decision to do, but we've got opposition teams spooked. And that discussion, though, I'm not sure if you've first crack, it was good last night because David King wasn't on, he had COVID isolation, but it was Montagna and the ex-D's player, what's his name? The Hawks player.
Jordan Lewis.
Jordan Lewis, and that was great. And they were talking exactly about that decision to do that at this point in the season. What was that about? It was a really fascinating game from that perspective. It was just how cool and calm we were. It was great for me because I backed Melbourne to win in the 25 to 42 point range. That was perfect, those late goals. It just worked out. It just worked out fantastic. So, I thought it was a fascinating game. And as I talk about that decision, but our ability to control the tempo in that game, or to not blink, just to, that was so where we're at the moment, and to be able to turn on a switch, take advantage, kick 4 or 5 goals, and then we just held it from that point on. It was a uber impressive performance.
We have a caller on the line. Good evening, caller. Who am I talking to?
Good evening, Michael Hintz here. Good evening, gentlemen.
Hi, Michael.
Hello.
Hi, Michael. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just wanted to talk about one particular player who seems to go under the radar, and I don't mind this at all, and that would be one James Jordan. I thought he put in one of the best games he's played to date. That, and the other thing is we're not reliant on just Petrarca and Oliver having standout games all the time. Those two factors I think are worth comment, particularly James Jordan, who doesn't get some comment on some other players, but not Jordan, to my way of thinking. He slipped beneath the radar, and that's fine. I'm happy about that. What's your view, gentlemen?
So, Bin Man was going to talk about James Jordan in his positives, but we'll take it. May as well take it now because you're on the.
Stolen your thunder, Bin Man. Apologies.
No, we'll talk about it now. That doesn't matter. It's perfect timing. Bin Man, go ahead.
Well, you have, Michael, you've stolen my thunder on two fronts. And one of them is who I'm going to call him JJJ now, the Triple J, James Jr. Jordan. But he was terrific, wasn't he? And I thought that was his best game for the club. He's such a clever ball user. And his ability to sort of position himself. For me, he looks like a old school sort of suburban footballer. And I think he's 2-3 years away from his best, to be honest, because I think he's got the sort of physique that he's going to take that length of time to build into the sort of strength, for instance, that Sparrow has. I think he was terrific, and I think like high 20s, mid 20s possessions,
27
possessions, and used them super well. The fact that he played wing, and Gus went back, and the ability to be able to have Gus back there has been enabled by Jordan. Yeah, I totally agree. I think he's a sort of player who will be 250 game, and he's, I'm not sure if you heard the interview we did with Adam Uze, but he was saying what a great sort of club person he is off the ground. He's quiet and unassuming, but he gets on with the business. So fantastic sort of character to have at the club.
Yes, I did hear that interview.
Yeah, really agree. Now, your other point sorry, Michael, go.
Yep. No, the other point. No, go on, Binman. I'm listening. Sorry.
Yep. So the other point about Petrarca and Oliver, I was actually going to make that on the back of what David King said, because you're exactly right. That's where, we've put them on ice almost. Like, we won that game. Neither of them got out of a trot. They didn't bother really. And that's where, if, on David King's sort of estimate, we're going at 70%. We're not going at 70% because we're not playing particularly well. We're going 70% because we're allowing the James Jordan to step up and take centre stage. And, the last couple of games, Petrarca's throttled back and, allowed the other players to get on with it. I mean, Oliver didn't look like he was sort of really running at full power. Partly that was the way Port set up that game in that first half. We didn't need to, because we were just watching them kick it around. But yeah, 100% right. And I don't think it's because either player are not in brilliant form. It's just that I think it's almost a conscious thing. And I wonder whether that's reflected in their game time. I'm not sure, actually. But yeah, I think they're both good points.
Anything else, Michael?
And also the little one percenters that players like Petrarca do off the ball by creating contests. They don't have to be spectacular things, but the little things that often go unnoticed, they're still doing a lot of those, even at half a canter.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And also both of them, their leadership, really impressive on-field leaders. They've both become, Petrarca in particular.
Yes. Thank you, gentlemen.
A pleasure, Michael. Thank you for calling. And also just on Petrarca, I don't think he's frustrated by sort of having to take a back seat and perhaps, forego Brownlow, but, or whatever. He's not being selfish in that. It's the whole team is like that. It's sort of everyone is there to play a role, and if they have to take a step back or not be in the spotlight and just and sort of add to the team in different ways, then they're all prepared to sort of take that hit.
Yeah, absolutely.
From either of you, anything else general before we move on to tactical stuff? George, was there anything else in just generally you wanted to bring up?
I think we'll cover it all off as we progress through the program.
Big man, anything else general before we get into your tactical analysis?
No. I think that Michael's point's a really good one about both those, about Jordan and also Oliver and Petrarca not starring. That was the point I was going to make about King's comments. But so, all good.
All right, so Big Man, this week you wanted to talk about playing the percentages and our method of transition compared to other teams. So take it away. Yeah,
just really briefly, the way Goody sort of thinks about the game, and I think a really key underpinning of our game is percentages, and by that I mean really minimising. On that you hear all the time in the commentary, risk reward, and if you listen to the commentators, they're often encouraging teams to go take higher risks. They'll say things like, to get back in the game, this team X has got to take more risks. They've got to go through the corridor. They've got to, they've got to look to switch. They've got to be aggressive. Whereas so much of the way we play is about the percentages, and we absolutely scaled on the almost the sort of lion stage of his coaching when Ross Lyon, that is. So we don't take risks. So we go down the boundary line. We don't use the corridor. We rarely switch. We're predictable. We use the left side as we're kicking. With the way that television sets up, everything's sort of really premised on playing the percentages and not taking risks. So I've got the clip there that I'm wanting you to play, Andy's from Sanderson. So if anyone's not listened to it, he does a slot, a 20-minute slot or so on Thursdays on Waitley's show, and it's the best tactical sort of thing on radio or television I've heard. He's fantastic. Now this clip is the context for this clip is he's talking about percentages, but the context is that he's actually talking about how to stop an opposition's team's momentum, and it was last week, so it was on the back of all of those crazy momentum swings in the previous round's game, and how the question is, how would he go about stopping them if he was coaching? However, his explanation about how to go do that, I think was a brilliant. He could have been talking about how Melbourne play footy and under Goody and Goody's coaching philosophy. So again, the context is about how to stop an opposition's team's momentum, but I think it's completely applicable to Goody's philosophy on coaching and the way we play our game. So yeah, it's a couple of minutes, but it's a really interesting little bit of stuff from Brenton Sanderson.
I added some a little bit to the beginning and the end because I wasn't sure because the times you gave me was sort of mid sort of thing, so I sort of put on either side of it. But here we go.
The key element, though, for that, for me, is turnovers in the midfield. So the reason that these tall forwards have the influence that they do is because we are, as a team, we are creating turnovers, or we're giving up turnovers in a part of the ground where the opposition can go back at us with our defence not set. So it's a tricky one. What you have to do is ensure that, the way you fix it is you have to slow the game down. So as soon as a side gets 2 or 3 or 4, I mean, in the old days before 6-6-6, the reset at centre bounce, you would just flood all your numbers back behind the ball. And it was a good rule change. It keeps the game interesting for longer, but we're still seeing these fantastic run-ons by sides. So what you need to do is you need to change your offense. If you're having turnovers in the middle part of the ground and the opposition are going back at you at a defense that's not set, and you're getting these power forwards in matchups in time and space without anyone around them, you need to ensure that your offense changes. You can't take as many risks with the footy. So what we typically would say to our players, if you feel that run-on coming, take the speed out of the game. Our offense has to change. We have to go wider and we have to go slower. Now, the reason you do that, because if the opposition does get the ball, it's in a part of the ground which you're not open going back. So if you're exiting your D50 wide and slow, your defense has got time to get set. But if there is a turnover, the opposition can come back at you, but it's through the skinny part of the ground. It's density. It's much harder for them to get those players like Hawkins or Cameron or King or Himmelberg in time and space. Now, the challenge with that, and I know what your listeners would be thinking is, well, how are we going to score then? Well, what you're trying to do, almost like tug of war, is just get it back again to an even playing field. Take the speed out of the game. Take the opposition's confidence away. Don't give them those opportunities to come back at you in time and space.
So are we talking a sequence of sort of 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 4 minutes? Are we talking kick mark for sort of 10 in a row anywhere on the field?
Yeah, you're just trying to take the energy out of the opposition, because confidence is a real thing. It's something that the opposition, when they get it, you don't know how it's happening, but it's almost like a flow. It's just everything feels good. Everything's flowing really comfortably. So you have to take the speed out of the game. You have to look for opportunities to get stoppage, which if you do go wide, you can get more boundary throw-ins if the ball gets punched out of bounds, or if there's more density there, you obviously get ball-ups. But you just want to take that speed out, get the tempo back, make it a bit of a tug-of-war, get it back to sort of 0-0 for a bit. Got a chance to reset, but you just take that flow, you take that energy out of the opposition just for that block. You reset. You can, if there's interchanges that need to be made, you get your better players back on the ground, whatever it is. But that's definitely one trigger that you can pull.
Now thanks, Andy. So that was talking about how to stop a team who gets a run on. That was as I say, the context for that, and it was on the back of all of those wild swings. But when I heard it, I thought, well, that's actually exactly describes how Melbourne play footy. And it's what I've been talking about, that percentages going along the boundary line. If it goes over, we get a stoppage, either a ball up or a throw in. We kick to a contest. We back ourselves in to win post clearances. We back ourselves in to win the stoppages. We kick down the line to confidence with Jackson and Gawn and T-Mac pushing up and Brown pushing up. We win so many of our contests ahead of the ball. We the number one team in creating turnovers, and we create them there. And then we surge. We are so, in the old days, they'd be risk averse, but we play the percentages. And, so the way he described that is how you stop teams. All of that's applicable to our whole game style. We control tempos of matches. We look to frustrate the opposition in their tempo that they want to play. We play the game on our terms. And in particular, we don't allow them to do exactly what he said, which is we don't give them turnovers in the middle of the ground. So we so rarely get caught out one-on-one with our defenders. So rarely do we not have our goalkeeper or our last man in defence back. So rarely, a player like Hawkins just cuts oppositions apart when they get bounced on the rebound, and he did that again against Brisbane. Brisbane have got a fantastic defence, but time and time again they lost that game because they couldn't stop that ball getting back in quickly before their defence got set up. Melbourne don't allow that. Geelong can't score against us in the same way. When they did last year in round 23, it was exactly on the back of that. We didn't have time to set up that defensive thing because of they were getting them out of the centre. That's where they got us. So that description, I think, perfectly sums up our game and why we've got a huge advantage on the opposition, because the other teams coming at us, they're all still in the process of trying to get all of those systems right. So you look at a team like Carlton, great, no worries, but they have their defensive system isn't there yet. And the best example is Collingwood. Collingwood, love the way they're playing footy, but if you look at that table that I was talking about before from Watson 11 on scores conceded inside 50, Collingwood are mid-table, so they're 45% of times they're getting scored on. Now that's early in their evolution as a footy team. They've got miles to go in terms of working all of that stuff out, but too many times they turn it over in the midfield, and that's where they get hurt. And they lost that game. I'm sure if you saw the West Coast Collingwood game, they lost it purely because they lost control of the tempo of that. They should have done what Melbourne do. They should have gone to the boundary line. They should have done exactly what Brenton Sanderson was just talking about. Take the heat out of the game. And Melbourne do that when we're 25 points up, and we also do it when we're down. So we in the third quarter of the grand final, we took the heat out of the game despite being 3 goals down. And we played the percentages. We didn't look to take risks to go through the centre. In the Essendon game, when Essendon decided to up the ante to get the game flowing again, they took risks and we hurt them, and that's when the game finished for them, basically. It's just a thing to watch, I think, how we do it, but it's quite different to other teams. We're the only team who basically just goes down the line. And maybe the other teams can't because they don't have Max Gawn and they don't have the ability to do it to win the contest. But it's a clear tactical evolution that was cemented last year, but it began in 2020 during that year. And just the final comment was that tempo stuff. It just shows how long it takes, because 2019 was a write-off in many ways, but that year what we really practiced was tempo footy. And that's 3 full seasons ago, or 2.5 seasons. So, those teams who are chasing us have got a long way to put all of those systems together. But I love how we're focused on percentages.
All right, let's move on. I like that. Each week, we each take either a team or an individual positive and an area for improvement. This week, my positive was our esteemed captain, King Max, not to be confused with the media's darling and false deity, Max King. Our King Max was back. The return of the king, if you're a Tolkien fan. Max had 25 possession. He's taken an incredible 12 marks. He was marking everything, everywhere. He had the glue on the hands, 6 clearances, 33 hit-outs. a nice goal. Probably should have had 2 if he could have connected the ball to his left foot. A fantastic match by the skipper, and good to see him back at his best. George?
Yeah, it was a fantastic effort. It was 12 marks, I think, for the game.
12.
Yeah, that was miles ahead of anyone else. And, Max back to his best, and then to have Jackson sort of as backup, when David King was talking about other teams being very, very afraid, that's the combination. When that combination is working, that really cuts people to pieces. It certainly was helped by Port having Lysette and basically having to take Todd Marshall out of the goal square, but we took full advantage of it, and may it continue.
But Adam Uze in our interview, and if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, wherever you're listening to this podcast now, you'll be able to find that interview. So take a listen. It's 40 great minutes with a great person at our club. He did mention that, and I hadn't noticed it yet, that Jackson had started taking, the first centre bounce of games and quarters, and I noticed it this week. He was doing that, so it's good to see Jackson starting to take that number 1 role. I mean, Max won't relinquish it yet, but he's getting more minutes, so that's a good thing. Bin Man, anything on Max?
Oh, he was awesome, wasn't he? He was fantastic, and he got 10 coaches' votes. I saw. Yep. Totally well deserved, and he was clunking them so beautifully. It was like he was playing a different sport. The other thing about Jackson was great. He took a couple of defensive intercept marks as well, and he starts clunking them up forward and taking his share of intercept marks down back, and it's scary for the opposition, as George suggests. But yeah, that he was awesome, wasn't he? And there was a few quick questions about his form coming into the game. Max, he certainly answered them in no uncertain terms, didn't he?
And he did. George, you wanted to talk about our defensive structures being solidified with the return of Jake Lever.
Yeah, Jake came back this week, and while he didn't worry the statistician all that much, I think Jake's presence is probably not recognised all that much amongst people, in the sense that he's almost like the general of the back line. He controls where people are going to and the defensive structures, and all of a sudden Stephen May has an absolute blinder this week, and it's because Lever's come back in. He's putting the people in the right positions, and you do have to take notice that Max Gawn was interviewed after the game and asked about the return of Lever, and he said, Stephen May would be quite pleased about it because he spent all his time trying to get Joel Smith to stand in the right place before that. So I think that gives a fairly good indication of what Lever's doing down the back. And when you look at the defensive structures, once again, they scored 2 goals basically to 9/10 of the game. That means your defence is working very, very well. It was helped out certainly by Dixon and Marshall effectively not being there. We held them to 0 goals through the first half, and only that one through to the last. Then they only had one to midway through the last quarter. That was a superb effort, but it's all about putting these defensive structures in place, about what Binman was talking about before, about controlling the game and having the defenders coming back at the right time and in the right positions, and we could just control that game from start to finish.
And I guess this is a perfect time to discuss this now, since we're talking about defensive structures, and this has been an ongoing discussion. Like our conundrum in the forward line, it's our back line that seems to have an even bigger conundrum. Harrison Petty made his return to Casey on the weekend, and B-Man, I'll get your thoughts on whether he did enough to put his hand up for return this week or whether he needs another week to get his eye in, as they say. Joel Smith has been impressive this season, maybe not standing in the right spot, but he has been impressive nonetheless, but missed the match on Thursday night due to health and safety protocols. Tomlinson hasn't been doing much wrong. He's doing his job week in, week out. Selection dilemmas are a good problem to have. So Which way are you leaning this week, Bin Man? Joel Smith is available to come back. What happens? Petty, he's there. What happens?
I don't think Petty's. I went to that game and it was terrific. I'll talk about it in a bit. But they'll give him 3 weeks at VFL level. There's no
3 weeks.
One, I think so. There's no need to rush him back. Two, why would you take any risk? He's coming off, surgery to his to his calf. He was on the ground for all 4 quarters, but I doubt he played. He may have only played 50, 60% game time, at least one more week. Why would you? I mean, it'll be interesting because the sort of next week, so 2 weeks is the Richmond game and the Anzac Eve. So, my tip maybe for that game. So 3 weeks in all with the VFL, 2 more, I suspect, maybe coming back for Anzac Eve game would be my tip. I mean, why take the risk? And I mean, the benefit of not rushing people back is, as we've talked about earlier in the season, it gives players an opportunity like a Tomlinson to, how else when you've got that philosophy of not changing winning sides, it's almost like you've got to take that opportunity while you've got it in front of you to reward people for all of their effort last year, because, that becomes a factor come the end of this season. You need to get people's minds sort of focused on the ability, the chances to playing. I'm strong on, I think Smith will come back in and I think he'll come in for Tomlinson. I think Tomlinson, he's been serviceable. I just think that our defensive system requires a lot of running. It requires a lot of getting across the contests, and he's got the athleticism that Tomo doesn't have. He can impact contests. He plays tall. My sense is he'll. I think he's competing sort of Hunt, Hibbard, those roles, those 3 once Petty comes back into the picture. So my tip will be Tomlinson will come out and Smith will come back in, and that'll be the only change to the defensive unit this week.
It's a real conundrum because then when Petty comes back, there's more problems. George, anything you want to add to that?
And don't forget there's a bloke called Salem yet to come back, and Hibbert, by all reports, should be back and playing this week, so he'll be available no doubt in 2 weeks or thereabouts.
The back line is the conundrum.
Yeah,
well, at the moment, you've got to remember that you've got Gus essentially playing halfback flank, so he'll go back to the wing.
And then what about Jordan?
Then what about Jordan? I think he goes to the bench, and I mean, the thing about Jordan is he's a classic modern utility. Like in the old days, back in the 80s, that's what the footy card, when you picked up James Jordan, the footy card, it would have utility across. Back in the day, it was like we're not quite sure what position he plays, so we'll whack utility on the card. But he really is our utility. He can play off halfback. He can play wing. He can give the mids a chop out, and he's smart enough to play whatever role he's assigned. He's a gun in that respect. But Gus will go back to the wing, and Salem will come back to that halfback flank.
Fantastic problem to have. The big man, you've listed 2 things. Well, you had 3 things. So and I haven't. You didn't list something for a room for improvement. But you know what? There's going to be weeks where there's no room for improvement.
I did think of an improvement.
We'll get to.
I'll talk about my positives. Or one of the things is there was a bit of criticism on Demonland about that game, and that it was a terrible game. We played terrible, and I just think it's a remarkable scenario. That's the sort of win that the Great Hawks sides during their premiership run, and the Lions in their 3-peat years strung together. They came out with a plan, just as Essendon did, to suffocate us. They're a top 4 team with a particular game plan. And on the show First Crack last night, Joey Montagna was all over this, is they deliberately and consciously decided to play keepings off. That to me says that they came into that match in the belief that their game model, their way of playing that they've played now for 10 years under Hinkley, has no chance of beating us. So that the game plan that they've built, they've practiced for almost a decade, they've got all of their systems, they commenced that game of football, as did Essendon the previous week, saying, look, if we play our game plan with this lineup, with those players out, we've got no chance of beating this football team. For me, that's the mark of a great side. And when I say not Port, obviously me. Sorry, with the D's. I mean, that's just fantastic. It's brilliant. Like, they came into that game with just the strangest attitude. Now, Montagna was all over it. He was saying, he was really critical, saying, well, that's just terrible. You're basically giving up. You're saying your game plan's hopeless. That I agree with him, and I agree that it was a terrible bit of coaching, and that's what Montagna was saying. It's terrible coaching. You're doing your own players' head in. And so they showed vision on first crack. It's well worth watching of them breaking their game plan, because they were saying they were confused about how to go about playing the footy, because out of nowhere they're being asked to play a whole different style of footy. So it was remarkable. The only thing he didn't mention, I think, is worth noting, is that they were 0-3. So, they were desperate not to go down 4-1. But the short version of it is that they came in and figured they had no chance of beating us unless they tried something radical. Now, he was happy with it, but not happy the fact that we burst. But he made the point that it was just that burst of 5 or 6 minutes of footy was the difference in the end. But nonetheless, it was, that I thought that's a real positive in terms of how the other teams are viewing us. And I remember back in the day in Hawthorn, that's what, teams would look to flood back, or they'd look to try all these radical solutions to beating. We were doing it all the time. Melbourne were doing it all the time to have any sort of chance of being in a match. So to be in the situation where good teams are starting a game of footy, conceding that their method isn't going to get close to us, it can only be a positive for us, I think.
Yes. Let's move on to room for improvement. As mentioned in my match wrap-up, I was a little bit disappointed with our ball movement going forward. I thought that a number of times we perhaps gave off one too many handballs, causing the chain to fall down. I don't believe it was a case of trying to be too cute or lairising. I think we just didn't execute right and perhaps took the wrong option. And it's obviously hard to tell when you're watching it on TV as to what the options are down the field. But a few times it seems like we did have the option forward, but we ignored it for another handball that was then intercepted or turned over due to poor disposal. And perhaps it comes down to the percentages you were talking about, Big Man, and maybe those preferred percentage options to go wide weren't available, so we went an extra handball. And I don't want to sound like one of those people who just say kick the bloody things, but sometimes I just want them to just kick the bloody thing. But what do I know? The club has some flashy silverware to show, and they might know what they're doing. So I don't know. Do either of you think we overused the ball going forward? I get that we play percentages, as you were talking about. And, we like to go wide, but if you're streaming down the field, sometimes going more direct to a one-on-one might be advantageous.
They flooded, though, again.
Yeah.
They flooded our defensive unit. So, again, it's hard to tell on telly. If we were at the ground, we would have been able to see it. They flooded even harder than Essendon did the previous week. So when they're chaining those handballs down the ground, they often, wouldn't have had a free space to kick into. So that might have been a factor. I mean, they definitely missed. I don't think they were doing anything Hollywood.
No.
They missed a few, maybe that's the 70% not quite switched on, I think, is sort of, but yeah, that's probably a factor, is the way that Port defensively set up.
Yeah, they were trying to stifle the game basically, and it wasn't surprising that it wasn't as clean for us because there were just bodies everywhere. We just didn't get the opportunities. Like, we all remember the grand final and how open that was. That wasn't the case in this game. And there was also a suggestion from one of our Demon Landers that the ground was wet. I found that hard to understand given the marking that was going on, and certainly wasn't a comparison with the Gold Coast game where the maximum anybody's got was 2 marks, I think, for the game.
I think dewy. I think I read somewhere that it got a bit dewy before the end of the night. So,
but yeah, you can understand that, but just the presence of so many bodies around the ball and their continuous hope to stifle us, it wasn't surprising. It wasn't as clean as before, but once again, the other opposition had better worry about us if that's our worst problem, most serious problem, and we still win by 5 goals.
George, you want to talk about Sam Wiedemann?
the weed. What do we do about the weed? It's
legalize it, I think, but
yeah, it might be the way to go. After the previous week where everybody was hopeful of him finally showing his wares and what he can do for us, he turns in a game that's just simply uninspiring.
That's always been the weed. Like, he'll do that. He'll play a game like that last week and then play a game like this.
And that is his problem, isn't it? He's played 51 games or whatever. It's his 7th season. You've got to be showing something, quite honestly, by this stage. You've got to be showing something consistently by this stage. He's going to be saved this week simply because as we all know now, Ben Brown's been suspended for a week. So he's going to get another crack at it. And boy, he better show something in this game. Particularly with the back line of GWS, we'll talk about later, a little bit underwhelmed. But Weed's problem, and I've been talking about and banging on about it for years. I feel embarrassed to say this. It hasn't changed. It's his second efforts. He just doesn't have the second efforts. And I think it was epitomised for me in the very first minute of the game. The ball came down the wing. He got a free kick. Because he was being manhandled in a marking contest, and T-Mac was in that very same marking contest. Wiedemann handballed the ball off to Jordan, I think it was, going past, and stood still. He didn't try and deflect the guy on the mark to assist Jordan. Meanwhile, T-Mac, who was in the same marking contest, has disappeared down to the forward line. He's run the 60 or 70 metres down to the forward line. Jordan kicked the ball to Fritsch, who marked and goaled. But as Fritsch marked it, T-Mac was already down to that contest. And then the camera pans back and Wiedemann's still standing in the same spot he was 30 seconds ago. You've got to do more. You've got to... This whole team has been built around second efforts, third efforts, putting in, doing what you need to do off the ball. Places where doing things that you don't get statistics for, and he just doesn't do that sort of thing. There was one statistic I dragged out of the overall statistics, just looking at T-Mac, because some people are saying, well, up until tonight, T-Mac should be going out. Well, if you look at the 1%ers over their career, T-Mac does 5.7 1%ers per game. Wiedemann does 1.25. So T-Mac's doing 5 times the amount of 1%er work every time he goes onto the field that Wiedemann is. There's no comparison. I can't see the coaches going for Wiedemann in favour of T-Mac, with the immense amount of work that T-Mac does around the ground, up the field, creating the second options, and then putting in the second efforts and things. So he'll be back this week. We'll wait and see, but as one of the other Demon Landers noticed, if he has to go back to Casey, he's on a 2-year contract, and I don't think we'll be losing anything by him going back there. He's got 2 years to prove himself. Well, maybe he needs to start proving himself very, very quickly.
Anything else to add to that, B-Man?
Oh, it's just those second efforts aren't instinctive. That's the thing. I think that's probably my biggest knock on him. It seems psychological. It's not like, it's just, they're not instinctive. Like, instinctively you just do that. Like, and how do you train? And so he's got to find a way to do it. And I really hope he does. I think just on the statistics, I think people have got to sort of start thinking past numbers when they're looking at who they're going to bring in. I mean, like he had one game, he kicks 4 goals, and everyone's like, everyone, a lot of people are saying, T-Mac, surely he comes out, he's been terrible. We, has to take that spot. Well, until we can do the amount of running up and down the ground, T-Mac's not going anywhere. So, and I think that in this day, again, you got to listen to Goody. If he picks players who are playing their role, if they're in the team, you can guarantee they're playing their role. He's got a lot to work on, and I hope he makes it. I think, there's nothing to lose for him to go back to Casey to work on it. So,
Okay.
You come up with the improvement in the end, Andy. I got two. First of all, the improvement was the area for improvement at the beginning of the game. I was a slight worry on Cozzy. For the first time, I saw some sort of not great body language. It was in the first 2 or 3 minutes of the game. Someone didn't handball over the top to him, and he sort of threw his hands up in the air a little bit, and it just sort of made a mental note of, it struck me as sort of unusual, and he's not been like that. And it was a little bit of a concern initially. But then as the match wore on, his pressure was unbelievable, including that one amazing patch of footy where we're talking about second efforts for weed and what's instinctive and what's not. He just needs to sit down and watch tape of, a 19-year-old kid who's instinctive second efforts, without exaggeration, in that contest on the sort of wing or half forward. There was one where, I forget which quarter it was, but there was about 5 or 6 efforts where he was just diving, scrapping, keeping the ball in. He'd made a mistake at the beginning of that chain and immediately tried to fix it. So that really helped me sort of calm down my initial sort of worry about his body language. And the other one, just not really improvements, just a slight query, is Rivers, and whether he's at full fitness, and he just doesn't seem quite the same player this year in terms of his run off the halfback flank. And just while there's Travi 14 in the chat room says, and I'm totally with him, Andy, please don't give King any more airtime. I'm with that.
It was more so not King, but it was what he was talking about.
And he pumps up Jack Viney, who had 6 tackles, 7 clearances and kicking goals. And I thought it was great because Uze's, we were talking in the interview with Uze about both those players, about Jordan playing, Jack having Uze made the point that it's only the second time or first time he's had a really good run at it pre-season, and he's looking terrific, isn't he? And that goal he kicked, he was pumped, and it went dead straight. It was a thing of beauty.
Yeah, his goal kicking's really improved, his set shot goal kicking. Used to sort of close my eyes a little bit when he was having a set shot, but he's been very, very accurate. Before we move on from the positives and room for improvement section of the show, I want to take my privileged position of creating this podcast and the Demonland website to sneak in another quick positive, and that's James Harmes. He's often the forgotten midfielder amongst our A-grade midfield, and I think he's played 2 really solid games in a row for us, 21 and 23 possessions respectively, but he's impacted the scoreboard with 2 goals in each of those matches. And this week in a low score, they scored 10 goals, so those 2 goals are very important. And I think he's been fantastic the last 2 weeks.
It's all about he's all about the role player, isn't he? That he just keeps on doing what he has to do and just keeps on putting in is the thing. He's barreling his body around. He's finally reached that stage in his career of the 24, 25, 26-year-old who's got a body which takes the heat of AFL, and he's starting to produce these regular performances of a couple of goals a game, denying the opposition opportunities when they should be getting them. He's been a real highlight, certainly in this season as well as towards the end of last season.
Yeah, totally agree. And he looks fitter than he did last year. It's like he looks cut and he looks, less sort of built in the upper body. He looks in ripping nick, and he's a beautiful kick for goal. Really confident when he's got the ball in his hand, and it was actually, I think, an important goal. The first one he kicked was a really important point in the match, and sort of not quite got us going, but it was the first goal, wasn't it, that we kicked in 25 minutes of footy or something.
Yeah,
he only kicked 7 goals last year. He's kicked 6 this year in 4 games.
Yeah, and when you need another grunt player in the middle, it's once again, it must be frightening for the opposition that Oliver and Petrarca are just producing a middle-of-the-range performance, and yet you throw in Viney and Harmes on top of them as pure grunt players. The opposition must be horrified to see that prospect.
Yeah, and maybe it's a sort of he's doing it and getting away with it, but I haven't noticed this year at all any of those attempts to push off like, the Dusty style and getting pinged or, I totally agree, Andy. He's been terrific this season and was just, he wanted easily one of our best on the against Port.
All right, let's move on to the Casey game. Big man, you haven't been lucky enough to get to a seniors match live and in person, but you were fortunate enough to make it to Williamstown to watch Casey take on the Seagulls. Unexpectedly, after a slow start, it was the Seagulls who were full of running, where they were able to shut Casey down and take a 1-point lead into half-time. After half-time, it was Casey's superior fitness and class that saw them run out winner by 35 points. Big man, which D's impressed you? Who's putting their hand up for selection? If not this week, in the coming weeks? Well, who's impressed you?
I would have to say the player that one, I don't know what happened to Melsham. Was he wasn't injured, was he, or was it health? Because he didn't play.
Someone on Demon Land said he's out of flavour.
He's out of flavour, right? There was not a breath of wind, and anyone who's been to that ground, it is normally the wind is howling. It's the most magnificent ground, I reckon, footy. I'd love to play a game of cricket there. I think it's the most beautiful ground in Melbourne. I don't think there's a ground that can top it for beauty. It's just a magnificent spot, right on the Point Jellybrand there. Great. It was a really entertaining game of footy. Really, really entertaining game of footy. And I really loved it. It was fantastic. I felt like a kid going out to the, in my Melbourne jumper and Melbourne cap to the quarter-time and three-quarter-time huddle. Really fascinating to listen to them. Petrarca was there. Captain Jack was there. Captain Jack Viney was also there, or Vice-Captain Jack Viney. And James Jordan was there. All coming over to the huddle at quarter-time and three-quarter-time. Track was talking to the forwards, the mids at three-quarter-time. It was
great.
It was terrific to be able to be that close. There was no barriers around them, so you could basically stand. I tried to stand in my Melbourne jumper in the forwards, but I got elbowed and shoved out. I'd say the player that stood out the most in terms of, when you see a player and think he's a cut above that level, was Bedford. He looked fantastic. He moved super well. He moved quick. His lateral movement, he is brilliant. I remember seeing a practice game that won at Arden Street before the beginning of the 2020 season.
Yeah.
He looked good that day, but he really looked cut above. He did some time in the middle. Petty looked great. Petty looked like an AFL player playing VFL. Benny Brown had a slow first half, but really worked into it and kept on working. I thought his attitude was terrific. I'm amazed he got reported because I was there. I don't recall. There was no Willie player got taken off with an injury. He might have got concussion test at one of the breaks, but I'm positive there was no break in play.
There's vision on Demonland and Cal Toomey's account on Twitter. He definitely hit him, and he's lucky to only have got 1 week.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was behind the play, and someone else reported on Demon Land that he'd been niggling Ben all night. And
what was it, George? You know what point of the game it was?
Oh no, I wouldn't off the top of my head. The ball had been kicked downfield, and there was a marking contest, but it was behind play where it occurred.
Right, because I had my binoculars on a few of the players, and I was watching him for a big chunk of the night, and Petty, and they were into Brown from the minute the game started, right through. They were shoving him, hitting him, bumping him, so he's obviously lost his lolly, which doesn't seem to be his MO, but I think it's unbelievable. He goes out for protocols, and he's back in, he's another week, and we gets the look in. I'm devastated for that, not least because I backed him to win the bloody Coleman, so that's that's no good. But I was really impressed actually, because there's no space. It's a tiny ground, so he had no space to run into. He looked like an under 21s player playing in the Little League. He's so big. And Willie don't have any AFL. They've got no affiliated. They're not affiliated thinger. So I don't even know they've got any ex-AFL. They're on the bottom of the ladder. And they were just number 29, the one on him, and their big ruckman who sorry, I don't know his name, number 11. They were just smashing into Brown the whole match. So very frustrating. But yeah, I'd say that Bedford really stood out. Rosman played his best game for the club. He looked fantastic, and interestingly, he played deep defender, halfback flank / deep defender for the game. Took most of the kickouts. And I thought he was terrific. So, that was really interesting in terms of that role. I'd say they're the players that stood out for me. And the other one was Max Gawn. He was dominating in the ruck, kicked a beautiful goal, good pair of hands, looked super fit, really engaged, good voice. A thoroughly enjoyable game of footy to go see. But Bedford probably is the one that stood out for me.
Man, I'm just intrigued. I've only seen bits on the replay on the AFL site. What's perhaps striking me this year with the Casey games is players like Mitch White and Munro almost seem like a step ahead or a class above a lot of the players that we've got playing. And I thought these players are showing their wares, but where are the players who have been on the list for a couple of years now? Where are these players, and what chance have they actually got of getting into the side? And I'm thinking of players like Baker and even Laurie at this stage, although it's only a couple of games in. When players like Mitch White can star, where do these players sit?
No, I think there's, that's if you think back to the famous Hawk. I know this is apocryphal, but Tuck playing nearly 100 games at reserve footy. I know it's a different era, but essentially it's a very tough side to get into. Obviously, that goes without saying. We've had a good run with injury. Laurie, I don't know. I mean, Laurie's only in his second season, isn't he? It's like there's no need to worry about Laurie. He can wait another couple of years. Rosman's a good X factor. White played fantastic. He's only 25, which was because he looks about 40. But I think they're sort of tough in and under players. But I think there's time for a lot of those players. I to be honest, Oscar Baker, I think it's hard to see him making AFL level. I've got a lot of time for him, but he's the sort of player who's on the fringe. Van Rooyen is the other one, is it? Is that how you pronounce it?
Van Rooyen.
He's got good hands, and he's got everything that you're sort of suggesting that Weed hasn't got. He's got in spades. Like he was fuming with himself when he dropped the mark at one point. He kicked the first goal, came out hard. So there's plenty to like of those players. I think there's plenty of time. It's as much as anything, I think, George, it'll be their psychology of whether they want to remain at the club. Like at what point do you to say, well, I'm never going to get into this side? I think Oscar Baker's probably, he'd probably need to make a call. There's plenty of time for Laurie. Howes is only in his first season. I think Rosman's got a future. Definitely Van Rooyen is there. So, I think the Munro and the White, they play great in a system, play their role. They're both really good team players. Both run in straight lines. That was something great to watch. And so I don't think there's any alarm bells for any of those players. I think that, they're just going to have to bide the time. The one that's it's a challenge for him. I mean, Bedford's one of them, but Chandler, I mean, it's a tricky one he's got to get past Spargo, really, Chandler. Whereas I think Bedford can come in for multiple positions. He can play a nibbler role. He could also even play in midfield. He is sub, so I think he'll be the sub for the next period of time. So I think Chandler's that one where he's good enough to play at AFL level, and will he be, does he want to, how long does he want to play and not get into the side before he thinks, well, I've got to go somewhere else for another opportunity? It's sort of, I guess, what Richmond experienced, isn't it, in terms of losing some of their, those mid-level players.
The other one I was interested in, he seems to pop up with something special every now and again, is Andy Muniz-Wakefield.
Yeah, he played all right. He's got a bit of zing about him. I mean, the good thing I really enjoyed is like seeing that game with you, Andy, down at North Melbourne. Is when you're close, you really see the speed at which they hit each other, and you really hear it. And I thought he was pretty clever. They were into him as well. It was a pretty niggly match. There was a fair bit of fire, but yeah, he looks like he's got a bit of class about him. But he was hard running. Kicked a couple too, I think, or at least one.
Yeah. Two. Yep.
Two. Yeah.
So let's go ins and outs. Who's coming in? Who's going out? It's not Ben Brown now, so
No.
not Petty. Some perhaps Smith comes back in. Other than that, I can't really see us making any changes. How about you guys, George?
I want to find a way to get Sinead Goldrick into the back line.
That would be left field.
We'll talk about the AFLW shortly, but Sinead epitomises everything that is needed with the Melbourne men's team. Absolutely throws the body in at every opportunity.
Yeah, she's great.
Just straight at the ball, and anything that gets in her way, bad luck. But really, I can't see anything really changing this week. I thought Brown was going to come in for Wiedemann this week, but that's obviously changed. Petty, I think, is going to be another week. Hibbert's at least another week as well. So basically, I can't see any changes coming this week.
I think Smith will come in for Tomlinson. Will be the change.
That'll be interesting. I mean, he's got to be unlucky if Goodwin goes by his usual mantra of not changing really the winning team. Smith might just be unlucky that he can't crack it back in to the team. Like Hunt when he went out. I mean, that was very deep into the season and we were into finals when he was back, so it's very hard to bring him back. But yeah,
I just feel like that Goody sees Smith in the best 22 come finals.
Yeah,
and so he needs AFL level games, and I think he's the future. And I'd be surprised if he doesn't come in for Tomlinson, but we'll see on Thursday night, won't we?
Before we move on to the opposition watch, there was one player I didn't ask you about in Casey, Luke Dunstan, who we asked Uze about whether he was just sort of an understudy in case we had some sort of major injuries. What do you think of his game?
Yeah, he was solid. He was solid without super standing out. He worked hard the whole game. He was really in and under. It's a pretty tiny ground, so there was a lot of congestion. I thought he was solid without sort of blowing me away. I think Bedford's ahead of him, to be honest, at the moment.
Okay.
He's a relatively one-dimensional player. He can, he'll come in as a midfield. I think as Uz was saying last week, is that's his spot, isn't it? So he hasn't quite got the flexibility to sort of play off a half-back flank or half-forward flank. So it's really, he's a cover for Viney, I reckon. He plays a similar in and under role as Viney and almost a defensive in and under contested ball winning mid.
George, if you'd like to proceed with your analysis of the GWS Giants, who were one of only 4.5 teams to defeat us last season, no less at our home ground in the MCG. They're sitting at 1-3 in 13th position on the ladder. So,
yes, GWS are a bit of an enigma. They're seriously talented across every single line in the side, but they simply fail to get the job done when needed. They've got some serious injury problems at the moment. Phil Davis, their fullback, is missing. Jacob Hopper's injured. Daniel Lloyd's injured, and of course Toby Green is still out. Nick Haynes is a maybe for this week, being a test, and Braden Purse has managed to get himself suspended. So when they're missing their ruck and their fullback, this is almost like a repeat of the Port Adelaide side that we've just faced. You can't go into the game against the Gawn-Jackson combination with a single ruck or a second stringer ruck for the game. Mumford's no longer there, and Bruce was the great hope, and he did play a particularly good game last week. They got stitched up a bit by the umpires in Freo. The free kicks were 42-16.
I would have had a stroke, I think, looking at that.
Yeah, and it was only because Freo kicked 6 straight in the final quarter. There was only a 2-point difference at 3/4 time. So the Giants have still got the skills and the ability to stay in the game, even with all these players out. look, once like the Port Adelaide game, I think we've got them covered in various positions. That they won't have the back line without Davis and maybe Haynes. They've got
They got the young fellow. What's his name? Taylor, is it?
Taylor. Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So, but they're not the same reliable. They haven't got the same reliability as someone like Davis. Up forward, they've got Jesse Hogan, who hasn't set the world on fire, I suppose, is a fair assessment. But I think he'll get completely done over by Stephen May and the rest of the defenders. They're always a worry. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But without Green was
Green in both games against us last year.
Yeah, ripped us a new one.
We cannot play him for some reason. We've got no one for him. So
yeah, he's just a brilliant player when he's let loose. So it'll be down to the wire. Like it was for Freo, they'll keep themselves in it. Their talent's undeniable, but I think we're in the position of we'll just grind them down like we have all the other 4 teams this year.
Who do you think De Boer is going to tag? Because he always tags one of us.
He can pick who he likes.
Well,
It does not going to make any difference whatsoever.
Tagged Oliver last year. I can't remember who he. Didn't see that game. Remember that was the game last year that I was flying,
Last
and then
game of AFL footy I've seen.
Yeah.
and I decided then not to watch the game because I had missed it and I was frustrated. Anyway, do you recall? Did he tag Oliver in the second game?
I think he did actually. Now, I think he tagged Oliver in that game.
But the thing is, I like listening to Uze last week. As soon as you start tagging in the middle, you're one person down. And we've got either Oliver or Petrarca or Viney.
Well, they'll use his. I've seen De Boer tag someone this year, so 100% they're going to use him to tag one of Petrarca or Oliver.
Yeah, well, good luck.
And the other thing he said last week was funny because he mentioned this, and the day before I'd heard an interview with Petrarca saying the same thing about tagging. He said one of the problems with tagging is, one, you're a player down essentially. You don't have that player to use in your defensive all-team defence because he's with someone. He's supposed to be zoning off that person to be a defensive threat. But the other one, the point that Uze touched on and Petrarca also said, is they've got tricks now when the player's getting tagged of freeing up other players and creating things. So, when on the weekend, Track can just push forward, bring his tag with him, and then they can throw the opposition's matchups around because they've then got to make a call. You take the ball deep down into the forward line, one out, his Track's going to kill him. So, they do lots of things to break tags, and, cooler is the thing that Brenton Sanders said. I've heard that a few times, where it's really about limiting their influence, not doing a hard tag. But, De Boer will run with someone, won't he?
I think Uze used a term as well. What did he say? He used some term for tagging.
So basically trying to sort of minimise their influence without just sending someone to them the whole game. And he said that
putting time into them or something. Putting time into them.
Yeah, putting time into them. And it was interesting actually because in response to your question about us not tagging, he said, well, a couple of times that Viney did a tagging job last year, and so did Harm. So in that more of that context of putting time into opposition players. So I thought that was interesting.
Anything else on the GWS before we move on to the AFLW?
Yeah, if you want to make some money, just back Melbourne in the 24 to win somewhere between 23 points and 36 points. That's the range we'll win. That's much to the frustration of everyone because it's like we could have won it by 10 goals.
I was in that camp. I was firmly in that camp. Why didn't we? Could have thumped them, but no. I think you've converted
Joe
me.
Cool this year.
Yeah. Well, it seems to be our sweet spot, that 23 to 30, whatever.
As I
40.
put on Demon Land, if you're winning 18 games in a season or 16, 17, your percentage really looks after itself. We're already got the most percentage and we haven't put a team away yet. So,
yeah, it's look, if we start losing games, then I'll start worrying a bit more about percentage. But if you keep winning, it's not a problem.
The only thing I've said this about the Giants before is that I find it really interesting the way they set up it. They really set up like an old school footy team. It's like, they're a man on man. Everyone does some sort of form of zone defence these days, but they don't really they're very meat and potatoes the way they go about it. It can be a really effective style of footy, but they've really got to win the contest. If they don't win the contested ball, they don't win footy games. And that's true of most teams, I guess. But so if we come out in our normal sort of style, I don't think they'll be able to go with us.
All right, let's move on. We'll talk about the AFLW Grand Final. So after the joy of victory at the Adelaide Oval on Thursday night, it was heartbreak for our women's team at the very same ground 2 days later. In their first ever AFLW Grand Final, the Demons were beaten by a stronger and more experienced Adelaide Crows by 13 points. I thought we did very well to stay in the match, and as a result of some wayward kicking, perhaps the Crows should have been further up at half-time. I think we were constantly under pressure every time we got possession. The Crows had stronger bodies than our players. At times, it was as if it was women playing against some girls. We were harassed and tackled. We were forced to just get it and kick it. Couldn't seem to get a clean possession, and therefore, when we went forward, we often kicked to an outnumbered contest or just to space, and no one was really there. Conversely, they didn't seem to have a problem moving the ball forward and were sort of easily allowed to find space and loose players. I thought our defence held up very well, but in the end, the Crows were just too good, and they deserve their third premiership. George?
Yeah, I think that was a fair summation there, Andy. It's women against girls, and
that's not disparaging our ladies. They've had a great year.
Absolutely not. But Adelaide have been gifted by the AFL exclusive rights to South Australian football for the last 6 years, and it's not surprising that they've got the best team in the competition, and of the 5 premierships that have been decided out of the 6 seasons, they've won 3 of them now. So thank you very much, AFL. It's you've got the results you wanted, but hopefully when Port Adelaide come in next year, that Adelaide will lose a considerable number of their players, and we'll start to get a much more even competition.
Someone said that they hadn't really lost many players to the expansion teams.
No, there is, but the problem is that there's certain rules in terms of drafting, in particular, where you get preference to the. You can't basically draft for an interstate player unless they want to go there. Mm. So Adelaide, have, like I said, have just had the pick of the very best players in South Australia for the last 6 years, and they haven't lost any players. Naturally, why would they want to? They're all happily ensconced in Adelaide, so we can't worry about that. But like I said, hopefully they'll lose a good number of their players to Port when they start up come August. In particular, Erin Phillips, who will probably go back to where her father played for all those years in Port Adelaide. So take Erin Phillips out of that side, and all of a sudden the game against us becomes a little bit more even. But it's not just her. Hatchard and Chelsea Randall are just fantastic, but they're big, strong girls. And when you look at a couple of the Melbourne girls, Lily Mithen, I suppose, is the example that probably really stands out. She's slight. Well. Yeah, they're very slight girls, and they were just monstered, simply monstered. Yeah. In the middle, we've got Eliza West and Liv Purcell, who, Eliza West's first season, she's been suddenly thrown up against these huge monsters of girls. She held her own, as same as Liv Purcell, but they're just not used to that sort of pressure. So it wasn't surprising the end result. I don't think we set up particularly well yet again. Daisy was wasted for half the game, sitting down the forward line doing nothing when the ball's not going down there. When she swung into the back line, it's not about the defence. It's just she knows how to read the play and use the ball. I think we're wasting her up forward, and I think the only reason we do use her up forward is because we've got no one else. Taylor Harris has obviously cemented her place, but as we saw in this game, Taylor was triple teamed time and time again. My question in that game was Where are the Casey Sheriffs? Where are the Kate Hawes? Elisa Bannon, we know, has got the speed, but she needs an open paddock to do it. Where were the girls who were there to help Taylor out when she was in the marking contest? Where are the ones who were meant to be crumbing at the sides? They just weren't there. Adelaide were well structured, bigger girls. It was surprising we were able to stay in the match for so long. The defenders were just absolutely first class. Yeah. I mentioned Goldrick before, but Colvin and Birch just denied them time, and Shelley Heath as well, just denied them time and time again and kept us in the game. And if we'd been able to jag a couple of goals, particularly the one that Lily Miffin was unable to kick, from 20 metres out, that would have brought us back within brought it down to 3 points, I think, at that stage in the game.
Would have been highway robbery if we got away. They were.
It would have, but it would have also sent the alarm bells ringing in the Adelaide girls. And you saw the difference to the way we were playing in that second half. All of a sudden, a bit of inspiration. If we'd gone in to half time 3 points down instead of 9 or 10 or whatever it was, it would have been a very, very interesting second half. But we would have stolen it. They were definitely the best side and have been all season.
Funnily enough for me, I mean, I wasn't confident at all going into the game because they were the best team this year and they were deserved winners. Hatchard is just a genuine star. I thought it was super coaching putting the skipper into the centre because it threw us a little bit. It wasn't particularly dominant in the centre, but, it just threw our structures. Zanka just needed to step up and win some more ball in the centre.
Yeah. Zanka got a quad injury about 3 weeks ago.
Right,
she even at the preliminary final last week, she was still hobbling. So she couldn't. Their very first goal, where their player marked it against Zanka, Zanka couldn't get off the ground.
Yeah,
she just couldn't jump. So she was obviously carrying an injury and was ineffective in the middle.
For me, really our only chance of winning it was to get it in the open and get it outside and run and move the ball quickly, because in a funny way, it was like watching the men's team in the opposite. It was like the grand final, but the opposite. We play our preferred game style. I know we've talked a bit about this, George, is that moving quick, hitting up targets, getting the ball in flow, using the corridor, which is like the dogs. But, the problem with that model is it breaks down under the most intense finals pressure. And Adelaide play like us, percentages, territory, win the contest, force turnovers. They got folded back time and time again to give Taylor Harris no space, physically buffeted her out of the contests. We didn't have any answers. And the only way, seeing what that was our game plan, we weren't going to beat them in hand-to-hand combat. The only way to do was to get that ball moving. And when we did finally get the ball breaking open a little bit is when we looked like we had a chance. We just needed to take every chance. Every time we went in 50 at the end, we needed to score and we couldn't get going. Just Travie14 just posted before in the chat room that Daisy's won the BNF too, and be really interesting to see whether she goes on. But any feeling on that, Andy, whether she'll play on?
No, I haven't heard anything.
I think she will, and the reason is that the new competition starts in August.
Yeah.
By which time, if she has coaching ambitions or media ambitions, that's going to happen next year.
Yeah, that's right. So
there's the chance that she can actually play another season of football that'll be finished by the end of this calendar year. And why wouldn't you if you're already you have a break, but let's face it, it's just like a straight into the pre-season for the men's ready for another one. I think that's also fortunate for us because I think Karen Paxman's going to be in the same situation.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you go around for another year? I think the real question that we all face and the AFL is, what are the Irish girls going to do?
Yeah.
I'd be heartbroken to see Goldrick go back, but she was probably on the outer in Dublin as a player. She wasn't selected, first selection as she was and has been in the past. So there might be more attraction to stay in Australia for another year or two. I'm prepared to offer her any visa to stay here, Australian citizenship, and I'm sure there's a few people that'd be willing to marry her if necessary.
Well, it's interesting if they lose the Irish players. They've got a big problem, I think, coming up with this season is that I forget, is it 2 more teams coming in?
Yes,
Hawthorn,
Essendon, Port, and West
Four,
Coast.
isn't it? So it's 4 more teams, and
No, Sydney, I think's the other one. No,
Sydney, sorry.
Four,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
if you lose the Irish players as well, then your talent pool is getting pretty thin, to be honest. So
Yeah.
it's a problem.
Yeah, so hopefully we won't lose too many, but we can only wait and see. But I think Daisy and Karen will stay on. Why wouldn't you stay on for basically only another 6 months?
Although, again, I'm going to go to the chat room here, and Travie 14 with all the news. The newsbreaker is Collingwood have thrown a massive playing and coaching deal at Daisy. They posted. So, Jesus, how would that be, losing Daisy to the Pies? Come on.
Yeah.
well, it just depends whether that's the way. You would think she'd probably perhaps want to go into coaching afterwards, but then again, she's got a nice cushy job in the media as well, so maybe she wants to still play.
You could do both, I think, couldn't you?
Yeah, perhaps.
Especially you're playing August to December, you could do both. So
that's true.
I think George is probably right. You play one more season at D's, go coach Collingwood and get a cushy media job, and probably set herself up for the next decade or so pretty well.
Thank you for listening. Thank you to Michael for calling in, and thank you to everyone in the chat room. We'll see you again next week. Go Demons.
Go Red Legs.
Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons.